The issues are on my end, I think. Okay.
Okay.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are on this fast forward planet. Still wrapped in a pandemic. Yes, indeed. And there are more pandemics coming unless the world gets its act in order and gets serious about vaccine equity with the current one, filling the gaps and the like. We're on a human heated planet. The climate is changing in ways that haven't happened in millions of years, and human beings are releasing flood of greenhouse gases, mostly from burning fossil fuels, changing climate, raising sea levels for centuries to come. And we are trying to figure out ways to deal with that. I've been writing about this for 35 years, more than about half of my life, which is a sort of gets to that point of what's that thing about insanity, Randy, when you do the same thing over and over again, expecting
pounding your head against the wall.
Yeah. So, and I'm here to talk about name calling in the climate fight. There's been a lot of it over the years, sort of intensified recently around both Joe Manchin and yesterday at a New York Times event during Climate Week around David Malpass, the head of the World Bank. Al Gore was on stage and said some key things. It's clear the move to try to get the Trump-appointed president of the World Bank dethroned, but the way it was done brings up some old terms, climate denier. And Joe Manchin is the other one who has been pilloried for years. He's this miraculous thing, a Democrat in West Virginia in the Senate, who he was said to be the most endangered Democrat in America when Trump was going after get reelected a few years ago. And he, for all of his favoritism for for coal interests, without him, there would be no $370 billion 10-year package of spending on climate. So, but nonetheless, he's in the crosshairs of a lot of environmentalists, old friends of mine. So there you go. That's kind of the landscape. Randy Olson is in Nepal, far from his normal surfing environment, and I'm just thrilled to be able to connect with you, Randy, live here on the opposite ends of the world. In the morning here in Maine, and you're there in evening, getting ready to move from where you've been. Just a quick hello. What are you doing in Nepal? Oh, sorry. Did I freeze? If I froze, it's because I'm on Elon Musk's Starlink satellite system. And so I don't have a wired connection to the internet. Hopefully you can hear me now. I was introducing Randy, who's in Nepal. And Randy, I just want to get a sense of, what the hell are you doing in Nepal? You're a story evangelist, a communication evangelist, a former marine biologist. And fill us in.
They made me an offer I couldn't refuse from the World Bank. I've been here for a week working with two groups. There was two retreats they had set up for folks from the World Bank. And they'd contacted me about 6 months ago about the ABT framework course that we've been running for 2.5 years. And they were keenly interested in it. So we're running the course with one group of them right now for the fall, the 10-week session. And then just happened to be right now, they were doing this week 2 retreats. The first for 3 days was with their sustainable development leadership team. And the second is with their South Asia water group. And I came over, they brought me over here about a week ago to do ABT framework stuff with them. I usually don't do it in a single day. I don't do any one-day workshops. I preach against them. But because they had the one group doing the course that I'd be working with here, and they've already had a few sessions, that I agreed to do that. And then the other group was the leadership team. What I wasn't quite prepared for was how incredibly good these folks are. And it's been a tremendous week, just a real joy. They, especially that leadership team, the first group, really both groups, but from the outset, really smart folks who were eager to work on communication, came to me saying, we know we're not good at it. They're really not good at the World Bank. The sad thing is hearing, repeated explanations to me about the superstructure of how the World Bank's organized. What a mess. They've got one system of being organized into global sectors, but then there's a parallel thing of different countries, and then there's a bunch of other different categories, and basically nobody can quite explain to me.
Having dealt with the World Bank as a journalist for decades, it is a maze that, like many institutions, even within the World Bank, there are people who don't talk to each other, don't even know they exist, working on the same issue.
Yeah. And I think a lot of bad communication arises when you've just got a structure that's so strangely put together from the outset. So that's why they all, there was not a single person that was saying, well, we think we're pretty good. They all said, we know we need work on this. Even before I got here, they sent me one slide presentation. There was just staggering amounts of information up on the screen, sentences and sentences, text and text and text of that's how they make these presentations. So we set in the first group who were tremendous. And as I say, it's this affirmation thing of taking the ABT and saying, yes, and we can use it for this and this and this. And they're just very different from so many groups of scientists that we work with who are so trained in negation. They're really difficult to work with at times. They a third of them just negate from the beginning. Well, we don't know about this. We're not sure if we can do this. And you just plow along hoping that 1/3 of them really will get it and put it to use. And they usually do. And it's worth doing for the sake of them. But in this group of probably 25 people, every single person was on fire with it.
So just yes. It's worth, before we get to this question of name calling and the like, it's worth getting at the ABT. For those who don't know those initials, but therefore it's Randy has developed a really interesting sort of workout, training, mental discipline for how to structure.
Let me explain. Actually,
of course,
it's more than it's a model. It's more than just a workout or training. It's a model, and it's the definitive model for communication. And I invite anybody who wants to debate me at this point that there's some other model that is equal or better. There just isn't. This is the core of narrative, and we're finally hitting a tipping point this fall. Despite the science world, not with the help of the science world, not with the help of any foundations, not with any scientific organizations that have really thrown any muscle behind it, but all these other organizations are finding the power of it. So we're running the 30th round of our training program. And this fall, we've got 4 concurrent sessions going with the World Bank, with Genentech, with Pfizer, with Georgia medical schools. So at the grassroots level, we're catching fire, but the further up you go up the chain of command, you get to the highest levels. And number one, they don't get it. But number two, there just really isn't much urgency about the poor communication. They give lip service to it, but they really aren't committed.
Which is kind of a shame because, well, it's kind of a shame because we've been dealing with a pandemic. We're dealing with climate change that everyone says is urgent, and yet people are getting into fractious discourse rather than looking at ways to shape your language and your relationship better.
Yeah. And that's what this incident arises out of. And so the context of the World Bank folks here is that I've spent this week working so constructively with them, and probably half of the people with their ABTs. And when I'm saying ABTs, what that is it's each person works on their individual project and boils it down to the one sentence core narrative, which is setup, problem, solution. People have been working on this for a bunch of years, but this is the core problem that we haven't been able to overcome. Therefore, this is what we're doing. And each person brings in their own ABT. And of these probably 60 people or so I've worked with for this week, I'd say about half of their ABTs are on climate-related problems. They're all working on climate. It's just in the fabric of the whole World Bank. And there's not even the hint of any kind of climate skepticism or resistance. There's 100% agreement that this is the number one priority. And talking to them for the past day or so about this quote from Al Gore, labeling the head of the World Bank as a climate denier, the folks here on the ground are kind of shrugging like, why did he have to do that? What exactly is the productive power of that? I watched that interview, the panel discussion that it came up on with the New York Times, and the guy's not a good communicator, not a good diplomat.
Well,
he really is.
Let's go to the videotape.
Yeah.
Hold on a second.
Yeah.
The tax credits where a lot of the heavy lifting is done are 10-year tax credits. That really is good for the private sector getting the right signal. I've already seen lots of businesses make major shifts in response to the passage of this law. But we have to make other changes. We need to get a new head of the World Bank, for God's sake. This is ridiculous to have a climate denier as the head of the World Bank. And here's why that's important. And the U.S.
So hopefully the volume was good and everyone could hear that. So there's the denier phrase. But that was just the beginning at this New York Times event. It switched to another moment where David Gill is one of their lead reporters now. Let me just switch the screen here. He built on that because David Malpass, the head of the World Bank, was there. So he said, let's get a response, of course, which is good. But here's how that played out. Let's see if I got this queued up right.
Going more in detail with all our panelists. I also want to give you one more chance to directly address former Vice President Gore's claim that he made on the stage you were a climate denier. His words.
So very odd. I've never met him. He's not involved in the efforts that we're doing. He may present as a climate person. I don't know what impact that's having.
Okay, let me just be as clear as I can. Do you accept the scientific consensus that the man-made burning of fossil fuels is rapidly and dangerously warming the planet?
I don't know if everyone wants to comment on that. What we are doing is having impactful projects that reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We have a mission of a World Bank.
Will you answer the question?
Will you answer the question? Is that?
I don't even know. I'm not a scientist, and that is not a question. So Al Gore can put. I don't know why it stays on the stage. What we need to do is move forward with impactful projects.
So there you go. It's like, do you pledge allegiance to the flag and God? And what do you think about the way that played out, Randy? Can you hear me? Randy?
Are you there? No,
yeah,
I'm not hearing you. Now I hear you.
I was asking,
yes.
Could you, what's your reaction to that? Both not so much Al Gore's statement, but the reaction.
Doofus. Yeah. The guy's clearly a doofus, and it is really pretty lousy for him to being elusive like that on what ought to be a fundamental, simple little answer of, yes, it's human caused. And in fact, it's 10 to 15 years out of date to not be willing to say that. Even a lot of the climate skeptics, I think, are willing to concede that now. So he's terrible and all that sort of stuff. The question, I feel, in terms of communication dynamics is Gore helping things by using this? I've just had a problem with the term climate denier from square one. I've had a problem with the overreach that they've tried to do in their communications, going back to James Hansen saying that the heads of the oil companies should be tried for crimes against humanity. I mean, it's so much hyperbole that is academically put together. You have to cerebrally put together several facts to make a connection between the heads of the oil companies and crimes against humanity. And so it just hasn't connected with the masses for 15 years or so. And I feel like this thing, in this case, as I say, the people here that I'm working with, they just said, why did he have to do that? It would have been fine for him to just do a detailed critique of the guy and make it clear to everybody what's going on. But it's the denier thing, connecting them with Holocaust deniers. It's incendiary language that I don't see a need for it. The punishment doesn't fit the crime when his entire agency is hard at work on climate. That's what he ended up saying, and his whole thing was going through all the details, which I'm seeing on the ground here as a fact. There's not any sentiment within this World Bank group of doubting climate, anything like that. He's just a doofus. None of them are impressed with him. He's not a great leader, but why trouble it when the work is happening? I don't know.
And
Who
what do you
knows?
think about what do you think about the general tactic of having to have people sign on to a definition that he basically David Gellis was saying it's urgent and human caused and rapid change in climate. Do you agree? And it became kind of a it reminded me of what happens at congressional hearings where so that dynamic feels to me and the audience kind of piling on answer the question. It just felt this then, as you said,
here's what sticks in my mind, and I've told you about this before, was I made a movie about the attacks on evolution science in 2006, and 2008 set about making a low budget film about climate called Sizzle, a global warming comedy that we made, and was fun, had a good run. But in the making of it, a Hollywood friend of mine put me in touch with Michael Crichton, who by then had become a climate skeptic and absorbed. And he wasn't a climate skeptic, you know, in deep discussions with my friend, he just was not yet convinced and wanted more detailed critical discussion about it. But he and my friend who knew him so well is certain that within a few years he would have given into the overwhelming data. He wasn't that dense. But the first, I spent 4 months trading emails with Michael Crichton about the climate issue. And the first thing he warned me is, you know, you may have gotten some flack getting involved with the evolution thing, but you better get braced for what goes on with climate, because there's a level of insanity with people going at this stuff. And it's absolutely true. And as a result, I don't want to get involved in it. I am now really focused on one thing, which is this powerful tool for improved communication that we have developed over the course of 10 years and intensely over the last 2.5 years, the ABT framework. And we're doing a lot of good work with it. And that's why I'm here in Nepal working with the World Bank folks, and they can see the power of it. And so I just don't want to even say anything about climate at this point. That's just not my job anymore. I used to weigh in with things, and I'm tired of all the noise. It's so counterproductive. And just seeing, once again, Gore shoot. I'd like to know who are his media advisors telling him, get out there and use the word denier. How's that productive? Yeah, I don't understand it.
Well, yeah, and there's a dynamic out there that if you don't hew to a certain view of this problem, you get attacked. And some of the worst attacks, friendly fire. Jacquelyn Gill, who's a fine climate-focused ecologist at the University of Maine, a very popular presence on Twitter. She has said, you know, this is not the end of the world, climate change. And then she get this sort of storm and swarm of people who have an extreme view of the climate problem viciously attack her for being scientific, for being scientific. And so there's something about this. It's I shouldn't say McCarthyist, but it does. The general dynamic is like the 1950s. You know, where you remember the Communist Party.
That's absolutely true. And you know, I got a dose 10 years ago with Nature published this paper around 2011 or 12. These guys claimed that 40% of the standing crop of phytoplankton worldwide had vanished, which was just bizarre, having taught biological oceanography for a number of years. Mm-hmm. And 6 months later, there ended up being basically a retraction. All these other experts wrote in and just said, how did this get published? And yet, once it's out there, and I ended up two separate events where people said this, and you know, and everything's going wrong in the world, and 40% of the phytoplankton's now gone. And both times I interrupted and said, that's wrong. And the next thing, you know, the Aspen Environment Institute thing, I did a thing there, and I did that. And then in the lobby, this guy came up, started shouting at me, what are you doing here? We don't need any environmental skeptics in our meeting, blah, blah. And like,
right.
What are you doing spouting out things that are patently wrong? Yeah, there's so much insanity with all of that I just don't want to get involved with. Again, I'm having too much fun. We're doing too much good work with the ABT framework. I'm done with it. I'm done with all of those people that don't have the time and interest to slow down and think through narrative dynamics. And I'm really disgusted with what goes on with the absence of media expertise among all these scientists who are engaging with the media. Crichton said it in his last major speech in '99, the AAAS address. Scientists don't understand media. Therefore, why don't they have major teams helping them? This is what I've gotten involved in to some extent on the pandemic. And that's what I was going to make a mention. I have 2 weeks ago, MedPage, the big website for medical world, asked me to write something on what I thought of how the Biden administration was doing with the communication of COVID. And it's been an absolute nightmare, a disaster. So I wrote this essay and weighed in among many things. Actually, can we share a slide or two right now?
Yeah. If
From
you
me?
hit share slide, oh, I see. There it is. Hold on. If you hit share slides, share screen, you should be able. It'll pop up in a way that I
So
can
you have
share.
slides.
Let me see.
No,
Do you see a share screen
you just
function?
said you have no slides. Yeah, I clicked on the button and it's saying slides, and let's not bother with it. Oh well, okay. Basically, one of the things that I had in the article was the Biden administration came out from the outset when they took over and communicating about the pandemic with these press conferences where they had 3 people on the screen on TV. I started seeing that, like, what the hell is this? They had Rochelle Walensky, head of CDC, and Fauci, and then the White House guy, Andy Slavitt. And that was bad enough. I mean, this is a fundamental dynamic. The singular narrative, the business community and the entertainment communities know that's a sacred principle. And there they are, somehow thinking that they get special rules for communication. We're going to have 3 spokespeople. And so then a few weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, when they contacted me in MedPage, you got any thoughts? And they sent me an article, and there was a screen grab of the same thing, only now it's 4 people they've got on the screen. Yeah, that was the podcast episode I did with Eric Topol in February, where we got into this a bit. But it's this idea that who's in charge? Who are these people that somehow think that the biomedical world gets to communicate differently from these basic human principles that go back 4,000 years, at the center of which is the singular narrative?
Right.
It's just baffling. You just don't know who's in charge, and it's the blind leading the blind. Yeah.
One thing that I think when I see the climate problem and I see the inutility of the divisive sort of debate forum, and I see, as you said, at the World Bank, all this useful work that's going on, the narrative that would really make sense to me is to focus on energy. And there's a great narrative about people around the world in developing countries have inadequate energy. This ruins their lives, cuts their health short. The women have to work hours in the fields to get the biomass to burn to cook their meals. But there's a solution. There are ample sources of energy that have a low climate impact as well that can make their lives better. Therefore, we need to work really hard to make energy accessible in all these different contexts, including in Nepal. So there's a story. You don't have to tell the climate story. You don't have to sell climate doom to create energy opportunity. And I think something about this feels it's partially my fault because, for the last 30 years, I've been telling global warming, and not energy. And the same thing goes on the other side for making societies more resilient, less prone to disaster. And that same deal. So you can have a narrative. Is it just that we've got the wrong frame? I hate words like framing, but this is not the frame. And belief or disbelief in this is not determined.
You're locking up so much, I'm not able to follow what you're saying.
Oh, darn. It's between Maine and Nepal. We have a problem with the internet thing. So maybe the signal is getting better. Basically, I'm saying
my problem, or is it you from Maine?
Later, or some folks watching, if they can or can't hear us. By the way, here's a comment that came in. Screen is so small I can't see it. Can't believe you're wasting time criticizing Al Gore for speaking the truth and being positive about Michael Crichton, who has used his platform to fuel denialism and getting others, after others you say are extreme on climate, and getting after folks you say are extreme, getting after folks for being divisive. Time's wasting, and I wasted time watching this. Spend your time on topics that matter, please. This does not. Well, there you go. What do you think? Boy. Fuck. Excuse my language. I'm not sure. I think I'm, my signal is frozen here, folks. I'm so sorry. Cal Burns, work hard on the energy factor. Yes, there'll be no more positively generative infrastructure system on a scale that will reach people everywhere. Donna Tracy says the signal is fine. Thank you, Donna. I'm glad to hear. We're having some problem in Nepal with Randy. So I want to get back to the key thing I've been trying to say here this morning, and I think Randy is getting at, is that sometimes, actually often, maybe most of the time, the solution is about energy or resilience more than about getting people to believe in or disbelieve in global warming. To me, the focus on whether someone is a climate denier or believer obscures a landscape of opportunities that everyone can agree on makes sense, related to clean energy, related to building more resilient communities. So that's what I try to focus on in my work at revkin.bulletin.com and on these webcasts. Randy Olson is an excellent story coach, and the question is, what story do you want to put in the foreground? Is it the story of the climate emergency? And then I would encourage those who do that to dig in on whose emergency is it? Who is in peril? Who is flooded out? It's usually people who have been marginalized or put in harm's way by poverty or lack of empowerment, and that then leads to solutions. They can be political, they can be technical, they can be as simple as knowing where the elderly couple is who is vulnerable to heat. And energy side, again, you don't have to get everybody to have some common frame of reference on the climate crisis to get action. This has been true in my reporting for a very long time. And John Sutter, I've long pointed to this video that John Sutter at CNN did in 2015 in the American county that is the most skeptical county on global warming that was found in a survey that year. And he found a guy there who was absolutely dug in. He thinks God controls the environment. And at the same time, he said that they're getting off the grid. They're covering their house with solar panels. So, and he also is, he worked for an oil company. So do you go in there saying, do you believe in climate change? Or do you go in there and say, hey, that's cool that you have solar panels on your house. How can we spread that to others? That's what feels like an opportunity. Randy, I can hear you there a little bit. I don't know if you can hear me. Randy? Hey, Randy. This was a good little quick pop-up show. Sustain What with Randy Olson, the ABT agenda pioneer, who's now running around the world helping train not just scientists but practitioners in how to be more effective in engaging with audiences around the work you're doing and the challenges you face and the solutions you seek. Randy, if you can hear me, we can hear more from you. If not, we might call this a wrap. Can you hear me, Randy?
I'm just, I don't know. what's going on. It's just getting bits and pieces. Can you hear me?
All right. Yes, we can hear you. So if you have you could actually pop on screen one more time if you can. We can hear you, but obviously, we're in an imperfect digital environment.
I'm still here.
Yep, we hear you. Anyway, thank you. There you are.
You hearing me?
Yep, we see you. We hear you.
Okay. Did you have a question?
Yeah.
Yeah.
A last
You had a
thought
question?
on. Can you hear me? First of all, there's a long lag, I think.
Yeah.
Well,
I'm not getting.
Yeah, I think we're.
Sorry. Maybe
It's okay. It's been great.
Kathmandu.
Yeah, Kathmandu, can do, and Kathmandu. I'm glad you're there, and the communication you're doing on the ground with people. The communication you're doing on the ground with people there is actually, frankly, more important than the communication we're doing here. So getting on the ground with people is the key thing.
I think I'll make a final statement if you're able to hear this, which is talking about. Yeah, I don't hear anybody I've talked to here with the bank who are hard at work on climate who appreciate that being useful to label the head of the organization who they're in the middle of doing a lot of name calling. If his actions match that label, if he was hard at work trying to undermine all this stuff going on in the World Bank, then absolutely, everything. Great leader, but he's not trying to change anything. And as he went in that panel discussion, he went through all the details of all the hard work they're doing with the World Bank. I don't understand how that builds morale, even in the climate, to have Gore just using that sort of hateful language. I'm sorry, it's just incendiary. Climate denier label is meant to connect it with Holocaust deniers, which is truly a horrible thing. And I've never gotten it. Sorry, And that person that wrote in that comment about, why don't you get stuff and talking about Michael Crichton? Well, I'm so sick of that with the whole climate thing. I'm sick to death of it. And I'm doing what I can to try to help people communicate better at this point. The climate movement has done such a rotten job with communication, deluxe rotten. So it's just symptomatic, that the head guy there ends up throwing this insult, shooting from the hip. I don't think that's well thought out media strategy to build a unified movement. That's the question. Are you wanting a unified movement, or are you just wanting a bunch of screaming and yelling? That's where
I think you've made a key point there. Focus on the work, and if the work on the ground is being impeded, then the person at the top is responsible and should go. If the work on the ground is going forward, then that's something to credit. And if getting locked into these pledges of allegiance feels divisive and distracting and is not part of a path toward a safer relationship between people and the climate system. Randy, I think the signal there is almost worse than the signal here in rural Maine. Thank you so much for being part of this today. Randy Olson, ABT Agenda. If you look at the text box or the link you're watching on, you'll see links to Randy's books and to his work, his training. And I hope you're all finding ways to have constructive conversations around energy and resilience that maybe don't require this sort of litmus test approach to the phrases like climate crisis, climate emergency. Ask some questions, listen, who's in an emergency? What can be done to limit the harm? Those are things we can all act on right away. There was a question about not talking about solutions. Everything I write on my dispatch these days is about paths to solutions. And I'm just posting that link into the chat box one more time. You can see it there at the bottom of the screen. So this is Andy Revkin. We had a brief discussion with Randy Olson from his work in Nepal with some World Bank staffers on the ground pursuing sustainable development. And thank you, Randy, for taking the time. And thank you all for tuning in. This was sort of a pop-up opportunity. And let me know what you're thinking. Post more comments here. Share this with others when we're done. I'll see if I can post a cleaner version of the video once we're done. And have a good day. And let's pursue a safer relationship with the climate system, with energy going forward. This is Andy Revkin, Columbia Climate School, signing off. Be well, everyone.